Harold walked the same route every night, made his checks at the same time, never spoke to anyone, until that night when three men broke through the hole in the fence. His reflexes in that moment would reveal a 30-year-old secret. Welcome to Story Factory. Before we begin this powerful story, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us keep these stories alive. In the farthest corner of Riverside Industrial Park, miles away from city lights, stood the Consolidated Warehouse Company's depot complex. 5 large hangars, 1 office building, and a 10-foot-high chain-link fence surrounding it all. During the day, trucks came and went, forklifts worked, workers bustled around. But when night fell, this place transformed into a completely different world. Harold Mitchell, 62 years old, had been the night security guard for this complex for 25 years. Slightly shorter than average, with somewhat hunched shoulders, always wearing the same navy blue uniform with a plastic badge that simply read H. Mitchell. His hair had turned completely white. Deep lines marked his face, but his eyes remained sharp and alert. Every evening at 6 p.m. he came to work, had a brief information exchange with Tom, the day shift guard, and took over the keys. Tom would usually say, "Hope it's a quiet night, Harold." Harold would just nod and reply yes. Even Tom, who'd worked there for 30 years, didn't know much about Harold. Harold's routine was precise and unchanging. First, he'd check the main gate, test the security panels, glance at the cameras. Then he'd retreat to the small guard booth with his thermos, making his hourly rounds throughout the night. No one had ever seen him hurried or tense. He did everything calmly, methodically, and quietly. The employees called Harold Silent Harold. Some found him a bit odd. He didn't attend social events. Even at Christmas parties, he'd just say, "Good evening" at the door and head straight home. Nobody knew where he lived, whether he had family, or what he did with his time. But Harold had one quality that employees might not notice, but management was very pleased with. In 25 years, there hadn't been a single security incident. No theft, no vandalism, no unwanted visitors. It was as if Harold's very presence kept criminals away. That Tuesday evening had started like any other. Harold had arrived at 5:45, changed into his uniform, prepared his coffee in his thermos. While Tom gave the daily report, he said, "Busy day today, 12 trucks came in. But everything's normal." Harold had nodded, taken the keys, and waited for the day shift to leave. When the complex fell completely silent at 6 p.m., Harold began walking. First round. Main hangar doors locked, side entrances secure, rear loading dock clear, cameras working, sensors active. Everything was normal. Harold had done this check so many times he could do it with his eyes closed. When he returned to the guard booth, he poured coffee from his thermos and turned on the radio. Late-night music, songs from the 70s and 80s. Harold usually listened but didn't follow the lyrics. They just stayed as background noise. On his desk sat the book he'd bought this week, The Pacific War Chronicles. He enjoyed reading military history books but never told anyone about it. Some memories were too close. He'd notice his hands trembling while reading certain pages. At 8 p.m. he went on his second round. This time a more detailed check, walking along the fence line, reviewing the vehicle parking area, checking the generator room. Harold never rushed during these rounds. He noticed every corner, every shadow, every change. Nothing escaped his eye. When he went out for his third round at 10:30 p.m., Harold noticed a small detail. At the back of the complex, at the base of the chain-link fence, the ground was somewhat disturbed, as if someone had stood there, waited. The mark was very faint, could be missed if you weren't paying attention, but it wasn't the type to escape Harold's eye. He crouched down and looked more closely at the ground. The footprint wasn't distinct, but the grass was trampled. Someone had spent a significant amount of time here. Harold looked around. This area was dark, not visible from the main road, and cameras didn't reach this corner either. It was a perfect observation point. Harold could take out his radio, call the security center. But he wasn't certain yet. Maybe a worker had taken a break here. Maybe a stray cat had slept here. He didn't want to raise a false alarm. When he returned to the guard booth, Harold didn't change his behavior. He drank his coffee, read his book, listened to music. But now he was listening more carefully. Every sound, every shadow, every movement. The sensors at the outer gates were also active, but Harold didn't completely trust them. His 25 years of experience had shown him that the best security system was human attention. When he went out for his fourth round at 11:15 p.m., he was almost certain. At the back of the fence near the third hangar, there were new tracks. This time the footprints were more distinct, showing someone who had walked carefully but hastily through the soil. And something else. There was a small gap at the bottom of the chain-link fence, very slight, too thin to be noticed, but it didn't escape Harold's experienced eye. Someone had tested this spot when Harold returned to the booth. He was now certain someone was planning unauthorized entry, probably tonight. Normal protocol was immediately call police, inform security center, wait at a safe distance if possible. Harold had memorized this protocol, had discussed these matters with employees for 25 years. But something was stopping Harold. A feeling inside him, an old reflex. He wanted to handle this situation himself. He took out a small flashlight from his desk drawer, checked its battery. Fully charged. He lowered the volume on his radio, put his phone on silent mode. He drank the last of his coffee from his thermos and stood up. Harold hadn't fought with anyone in 25 years. He'd never lost his temper, never thrown a punch, never shouted. His colleagues knew him as the calmest, most peaceful person. But tonight something was different. As he stepped outside, Harold's gait changed. He was no longer walking like an old, tired guard. His steps were more determined, quieter, more professional. When he approached the fence, Harold crouched down and examined the gap closely. The bending pattern, the cutting angle. These weren't amateur work. Whoever they were, they'd done similar jobs before. At that moment, Harold heard a distant sound, something like metal, a slight scratching. Someone was moving on the other side of the fence, 11:47 p.m. Harold hid among the shadows, held his breath. 100 feet away on the other side of the fence, he could see 3 figures. Helmets, black clothing, bags, professional equipment. The first one began widening the gap at the bottom of the fence. The second was keeping watch. The third was taking tools out of his bag. Harold's heart had quickened, but his hand wasn't shaking. An old feeling, that familiar adrenaline rush he'd felt long ago. Under normal circumstances, Harold would now call the police, wait at a safe distance, but he couldn't. Something inside him, a reflex buried for 30 years, was telling him to take action. The first thief crawled through under the fence, the second followed him. The third was coming behind them. Harold quietly changed position. He moved to an angle where he could see them but wouldn't be seen himself. Skills he hadn't used in years were coming back. Moving silently, using shadows, tracking the enemy. Enemy. Harold hadn't thought that word in a long time. The 3 men were advancing toward the main hangar. Its door was open, valuable equipment inside. Construction machinery, spare parts, electronic devices. Harold followed them. His steps made no sound, as if he wasn't touching the ground. Old training was returning at the hangar door. Harold could see them more closely. All 3 were armed, pistols in their belt pouches. The one leading was in his 30s, athletic build. His movement pattern showed he was trained. The other 2 were younger, probably inexperienced. Harold's options were call police and wait, or the "or" option hadn't been in his mind for a long time, but now it was there, strong and clear. The leader entered the hangar. The others began keeping watch at the door. Harold saw his opportunity. First step, neutralize the nearest lookout. Harold approached from behind the shadows without making any sound, without any hurry. By the time he was spotted, it was too late. When Harold's arm wrapped around the man's neck, the movement was so quick and silent that the second lookout didn't notice for a while. The man struggled in Harold's arm, but the experience gap was too large. After 15 seconds, he was unconscious. When the second man noticed his friend was missing, he turned around. His mouth hung open when he saw Harold. As the man tried to draw his weapon while the old guard was there, Harold was already moving. This time a kick to the man's wrist at exactly the angle the gun would fall. The weapon fell to the ground. The man bent over in pain. Harold's second move landed on the man's chin, hitting pressure points. The man immediately collapsed. 2 men, 30 seconds. Harold hadn't even taken a breath. When the leader came out of the hangar, he found himself face to face with Harold. The package he'd stolen in his hand, bewilderment on his face. His 2 friends lying on the ground, an old guard standing opposite him. "Old man, where did you come from?" said the leader. Harold didn't answer. He just took 1 step forward. The leader drew his gun, aimed it at Harold. "Don't move. I don't want the cops to come, but if necessary." "If necessary, what will you do?" Harold's voice was calm. He was speaking threateningly for the first time in 25 years. "I'll kill you, old man." Harold smiled, very slightly, but the leader saw it. "Many people have tried to kill me. I'm still here." This answer changed the leader's expression. This old guard wasn't normal. Harold took another step. The leader touched the trigger. "I said stop!" But Harold didn't stop, because he knew. Even if he'd forgotten for 30 years, his body still remembered. Step distance, reflex timing, gun-holding angle. Everything was the same. When the leader decided to fire, Harold had already moved. Sliding sideways, crouching, pushing the gun barrel up, while simultaneously punching the leader's solar plexus. The leader fell to the ground, unable to breathe. The gun was in Harold's hand. 3 men lay on the ground. Harold stood, gun in hand. He hadn't even broken a sweat. At that moment, Harold took out his phone, called 911. 911 Emergency Services. Riverside Industrial Park Consolidated Warehouse. 3 thieves apprehended. Security guard Harold Mitchell speaking. "Are there any injuries?" Harold checked the 3 men. All were breathing. All were conscious. Number just unconscious. 10 minutes later, police arrived. 3 cars, 6 officers. The leader was Sergeant Rodriguez, who knew Harold. "Harold, what happened here?" Harold told the story. Simple, objective, detailed. While police took notes of Harold's account, other officers were checking the 3 thieves. "Harold, how did you subdue these men? All 3 were armed and you're—" Harold paused. He'd been expecting this question but hadn't prepared his answer. "I was lucky. They were amateurs too." Rodriguez looked at Harold more carefully. This answer wasn't convincing. "Harold, in your background, do you have military service?" A long silence. Harold hadn't heard this question in 25 years. "Used to." "How long ago?" "Long time ago. Vietnam, 1970 to 1972. Rodriguez and Harold were talking beside the police car. Other officers were preparing to take the thieves away. "What did you do in Vietnam, Harold?" "Soldier. Regular soldier. Regular soldiers don't subdue 3 armed thieves in 30 seconds. Harold swallowed. The truth he'd tried to bury for 30 years was surfacing. Special Unit, Long-Range Reconnaissance, LRRP, Long-Range Reconnaissance Patrol. Rodriguez blinked. He knew about LRRP units. They were Vietnam's most elite units. "How long did you serve?" 2 years. Then I was wounded, came back." "Harold, why didn't you ever mention it?" "Because I was trying to leave it behind." Rodriguez understood. He knew many veterans. None of them wanted to tell war stories. "What happened tonight? Were those your old skills?" "I think so. I didn't want to, but my body remembered." Rodriguez nodded. "Harold, these men were professionals. Without you, they could have caused major damage. I was just doing my job. Number, you were being a hero." When Harold came to the complex the next morning, a different world awaited him. The news had spread. Silent guard Harold had single-handedly subdued 3 armed thieves. Employees looked at him differently. He was no longer Silent Harold, but a hero Harold. Everyone wanted to talk to him, hear the story. Harold was uncomfortable with this. For 25 years, he'd tried to be invisible, lived quietly. Now he was everyone's center of attention. At lunch, the factory manager came. "Harold, can I talk to you?" They went up to the office. Manager John Davidson had known Harold for 15 years, but had never talked to him in such detail. "Harold, what you did last night was incredible." "I was just doing my job, Mr. Davidson." "No, Harold, you saved this company. Those men could have caused millions of dollars in damage." Davidson took out a file from his desk. "Harold, I want to promote you. Head of security. Salary increase, benefits, your own office." Harold paused. This offer was what he dreamed of 25 years ago. But now, "Mr. Davidson, thank you, but think about it, Harold. You don't need to rush." Walking home that evening, Harold was thinking. The past he'd tried to bury for 30 years had returned in one night. He could no longer live as he used to. 2 weeks later, Harold accepted the promotion, but he had a condition. He wouldn't share his story with anyone, wouldn't talk to the press, wouldn't tell heroic stories. He would just do his job, protect the company. In his new office, he hung a photo from his Vietnam days on the wall. Himself and 4 friends, 1971 in the jungle. Only 2 of the 5 men had made it home. Harold was no longer running from his past. He'd accepted it as part of himself. Employees still looked at him differently, but Harold no longer cared. He'd lived quietly for 25 years. Now he'd shown who he was. Walking through the depot in the evenings, Harold moved more carefully, more confidently. He'd abandoned the role of old guard, accepted his true identity. A veteran's hardest battle is the battle with himself. Harold had won that battle. Some people try to bury their past, create new identities, run from their former selves. Harold was the same. For 30 years, he'd hidden his warrior past behind the identity of a quiet guard. But that night, he learned that true identity can never be completely buried. In the critical moment, the body remembers, experience returns, the old self surfaces. Does Harold's story seem familiar to you? Do you know people in your life who have hidden their identity, run from their past, but eventually had to accept themselves? Share their names in the comments. Tell their stories. Because at Story Factory, we believe in keeping alive the stories waiting to be forgotten. If this story touched you, subscribe, share. Stories like this need to be heard. See you in the next video, and remember, sometimes the strongest people are the quietest ones.